Professor Wolff is joining us today. Professor Wolff, thank you so much for being on the program with us. First of all, when this dropped, the first thing I wanted to do was call you and just chat with you about your thoughts here. I mean, people's general reactions were, yeah, we know that they're doing this, but what have we learned here that we didn't already know?
Well, there's actually several things. Let's begin by being clear. They have not released everything. They are dribbling it out, if I understand. Mm-hmm. And I think they're now smart enough, these folks, because remember, 6 years ago or 5 years ago, we called them the Panama Papers, but it was a very similar bunch of documents. That one was gotten from a particular firm in the Caribbean that does these kinds of hidings of wealth. This time it's a larger group of enterprises whose documents, 11 million, if I understand, have been opened up. So you're going to have to revisit this, Juliana, from time to time as it comes out. So let me mention some of the things that we've learned and that weren't quite so clear before. It used to be, and I'm talking about the last century or more, that there were literally a handful of places in the world where very rich people, mostly businessmen and women, well, to be honest, businessmen, and lesser degree, celebrity politicians, great athletes or actresses and stuff like that, but mostly businessmen were able to hide their wealth. They were places like Switzerland, Luxembourg, and maybe a few of the islands in the Caribbean. All that has changed. Switzerland, some years ago, was under a lot of pressure, and you should enjoy the irony here, from the United States, because the IRS claimed it wanted to catch the people that were evading taxes by hiding their money where no documents would be given to the IRS. They wouldn't even know there was income there to be taxed. And under pressure from the US, the Swiss cut back drastically what they allowed people to do. It used to be called having a numbered account, because all of your dealings with the Swiss bank would be in terms of some 6-digit number. Your name would never come up. So even if letters were opened or communications were interrupted, unless the authorities knew which person went with which number, which was a secret the bank did not release, they couldn't do anything. Well, here's the first thing we learned. The number one place in the world where money is now hidden is not Switzerland, it's not Luxembourg, and it's not the British Virgin Islands, even though the British Virgin Islands are still important. The number one place is the United States, and in particular, South Dakota and Nevada. Remarkable. Those two states, copying the legislation that was enacted way back when in places like Switzerland and Luxembourg, are now places to hide money. They have passed the law that allows you to set up an account that nobody knows about, that files information with nobody. They've now made them perpetual. In other words, these are accounts that don't stop, that can go on forever. So I think it is an important historic milestone that at this point in American history, when most politicians fall all over themselves, along with business billionaires, talking endlessly about transparency, that the reality is we are further from transparency in the terms of our wealth than we have ever been as a country in our history going back to 1776. So
I am wondering if the Jeffrey Epstein case and all of the money and the connections and the money. How is he not? I'm waiting on bated breath for him and his, I guess co-conspirators or whatever you want to call them at this point to be named in these papers. I mean, the King of Jordan is fascinating, but not as fascinating maybe as some of the people right here, in our own country.
Yeah, my suspicion, and I have no knowledge about this, but my suspicion is that they put out the poor king of Jordan, about whom hardly anyone cares very much, including the Jordan people, put him out there as a kind of bait in the hopes that the Epsteins of this world and the others who have much more money and have hidden much more money would say something stupid about how they would never do such a thing, and then they would be exposed in 2 weeks or 4 weeks because it would come out that they are in fact doing this.
I haven't really seen anyone reporting on the issue that, the United States, I said earlier in this particular episode that the United States gave, I think it was $1.5 billion to Jordan. And then Jordan, the king of Jordan, is somehow funneling money out of his own country and buying, $100 million worth of property and God knows what all else. I didn't read the entire thing because it's 15,000 pages. But shouldn't we start to see some either reporting on something that would make people outraged? Shouldn't we start to see some building of outrage? It's not just that these people have money and they're hiding it and they're not paying taxes that would support the least of us and the most of us as well they should be, but the fact that they're taking the money directly out of our pockets to do this.
Well, I mean, yes, by all means. It is, by the way, standard practice. If you're going to bribe either a politician or a business person, and remember, it is just as attractive to bribe business persons. Most of the bribing I've ever seen is a bribing in which someone wants a contract from a large corporation. And the way you get that contract is by giving the right people in that corporation an inducement to give you the contract rather than your competitor. And that inducement is a big fat chunk of money. But that has to be hidden because it would be dangerous if people discovered that contracts were being given that either have jobs or no. Let me give you a simple example. A bribe is made, so a big contract, I'll pick a country, in France, goes to a producer of something in Italy. Okay, so now a lot of Italians are going to get jobs producing in Italy what that contract specifies to be bought by the French. The French could have given it to one of their own subcontractors. Then it would have been French worker, all right? For public purposes, for political purposes, for your standing in the community, for your reputation that you spend millions on advertising firms to build up, you could lose that in 10 minutes. That whole deal has to be hidden. And one of the ways you do that is that money flows from one bank to another bank to a third bank to a bank in South Dakota where it vanishes into the numbered account that nobody can trace because the bank has no obligation to tell anyone about it. So every significant corruption in the world looks for that kind of protection so the whole world of business, which has these kinds of corrupt contracts all day, every day, 24/7, makes use of these hidden arrangements. Politicians who don't want to be caught have to do this to hide from the voters. And they're going to say all kinds of noise like, we have to preserve privacy. It's not, if you're going to run for office, you're giving up privacy. You can't run and then claim you want to keep from the voters the kind of information they certainly deserve and need in order to decide whether to vote for you or not. And it's the same thing with the businesses who have to cover their rear ends by hiding what they do. But let's talk for a moment, Juliana, about the taxes. We can't know the numbers. There have been some estimates. Saez and Piketty in UC California, they have some associates there. Gabriel Zuckman is the most important, and he's made some estimates. And we're talking trillions of dollars here. All right. Now let's follow the bouncing ball.
Yeah.
Republicans in Washington are using, as you pointed out, numbers. They're saying we can't afford to spend this wild sum of money, $3.5 trillion. We should only, as Senator Manchin, for example, and he's a Democrat, says, we should only spend $1.5 trillion, or whatever the numbers are. It doesn't matter. Here's my point. They all know about what South Dakota has been doing. That's not a secret. They know that Nevada has done it. They know that there are at least 5 or 6 other states that I know about that are considering legislation like what South Dakota and Nevada have done, because they want to bring in the fees and commissions that generates for the firms in their states. It's the logic of our system. Okay, Manchin knows it, Sinema knows, they all know it, and they don't do anything about it. And yet they stand there and they say there's not enough money. But of course there's enough money. If you simply enforce the law of this country and the traditions and what 90% of the polled people in this country would say over and over again, you could make sure that South Dakota can't do this, Nevada can't do this, and the tiny little country of British Virgin Islands, it would take Mr. Biden, I don't know, 5 minutes to get them to stop doing it. How are they going to oppose the U.S.? So of course the money is there, and the money should be attacked because it has been illegally withholding taxes. So the whole fakery of the government's handling of all of this, and that is true for the Democrats right alongside the Republicans. This is a theater. Do we have the money? Do we not have the money? Meanwhile, Pandora tells us again that the money is not the problem. It's there. It's a question of the political will to go after it. And that was always true. When the political will changed, Switzerland had to give a lot of it up. End of story. And the exact same thing could be done now.
I was thinking that this is the exact, if it's handled properly by the media, if people process it properly. I haven't had a chance to poke into like what the right wing hate machine is doing with these stories because it just broke. And we wanted to talk to you first. It is the kind of story that can bring people across the political spectrums together to realize that they've all been duped and all been had.
Absolutely. I have no doubt that you could phrase a question about this that would get you 80 to 90% agreement on one, however you worded it, and that you would see it across the board, Republicans, Democrats, independents, the way they normally do the polling, and you would get the demonstrated empirical validation of what you just said. I don't have any doubt. I think many right-wing people have already suspected that big business and then that they're in cahoots. You pick that up on many of the right-wing sources that I know about.
Well, that's really interesting. I just watched your video and I suggest everyone go and watch it. You have a video out. It's on YouTube. It's a Wolff Responds video, I believe. And right. You talked about libertarianism and exactly what it is. And you boiled it down to the fact that libertarians basically, instead of blaming corporations, they blame the government for all the ills. They won't, and they haven't sort of moved their eyes from that bad guy, boogeyman, to, you know, a class struggle, a class issue. But this leak actually does that. Am I wrong?
No, it exactly, it's very bad
What
for
are
the
the libertarians
libertarian.
going to even say about this? Are they going to be, well, I guess they should be allowed to do that because freedom, even if the rest of us all starve? I mean, at what point are they going to figure out that's not going to work
Well,
when they're
you
starving
know,
themselves? They're like
yeah,
these coronavirus people who go to the hospital. They're like, there's no such thing as coronavirus. Then they get the coronavirus. Then they're just about to die. And they say, the coronavirus is real and I should have gotten a vaccine. You know, it's the same.
well, there are libertarians and then there are libertarians. They're the crude ones who are not going to understand how to handle this, just as you say. But let me give you an example of the more sophisticated ones who will try the same ploy, but they'll do it with a bit more finesse. Here's how it will go. It's a bad thing that the politicians did. They wrote the laws that enable the bank to hide the documentation. So they will figure out to point the finger of blame on the political. Because the job of the libertarians, and I don't mind saying it bluntly, the job of the libertarians is very important for big business, because what they do is blame everything that big business does on a politician. That's their job. That's their project. Show how whatever happens that's negative isn't the fault of the economic power. It's always the bad politician. I mean, the irony in America is if there's large unemployment, the people are led to believe, including by much of the mass media, that you should be angry at the governor or the senator or the president. If masses of people lose their homes, you should be angry at the president, at the senator, even though it's an employer who fired you from the job, and it's typically a bank that forecloses you out of your home. So it's a real gimmick to have the libertarians. I give them this lovely name, libertarian, as if they're nobly
Freedom.
fostering liberty. What they're doing is they're doing a very good service for big business. Every time big business kicks us, we are told to blame somebody else, which of course makes it easier for them to kick us because we're not understanding where the problem lies and what it does. So my answer to the libertarian would be, of course the politicians wrote those laws. And why, perchance, do you imagine that they did that? Did somebody maybe ask them? Did someone maybe pay them? Did someone pressure them? Did they get a nice contribution to their campaign because they had a deal that if they got elected, they would write such a law? By the way, all of this is well known, well documented, normal business for lobbyists. In other words, once again, it takes 5 minutes to undo the libertarian game. It's really not that different from when Trump was president and we were told that the economic problems of the United States, a country of 330 million people, was ultimately the fault of 10 million undocumented immigrants. Really? Those 10 million dirt poor, desperate people, they were the ones who controlled what was going on for the other 320 million people who weren't undocumented. It's so preposterous that you can see why it needs to be repeated over and over the way libertarians do in order for that idea not to be thrown out as simply absurd.
We've been showing images next to us of the disparities in wealth. As you can see, this is like one of the mansions. And then the image before that was a child in poverty. And the one before that was, these images of back and forth. As we continue down the road of what you and I have discussed called late stage capitalism, and we look back in history, have we seen anything parallel to these sort of information dumps, people becoming aware of exactly what's going on as their economy continues to crumble, as the structure of their economy continues to crumble? And what can we learn from history around this?
Yeah, I think there are two things that I would stress. I don't mean to scare people, but there's no way to say this that won't have a little bit of that effect. Empires collapse not when this or that crisis happens, but when too many problems accumulate. And, it's a little bit like your personal life. You can handle a crisis with your husband or your wife, but not one with that husband or wife and your children and your mother-in-law and your local school board. At a certain point, none of them by themselves would overthrow your life. But the accumulation of what you haven't been able to solve or that you kick down the road, that's where we are in the United States. We have too many. The climate, the racial divisions, the grotesque inequality, now the failure to be prepared for, to cope with a pandemic the way other countries could. It's too many things on top of too many things. And one of the things that then begins to happen and makes the system crumble, it's really what you showed before we started talking. You begin to have decent people stuck in 1,000 places in the bureaucracy who finally one day, like that Miss Frances Haugen, if I got her name right, who finally say one day, maybe after a conversation with her boyfriend, I'm just guessing, I don't know anything about her, but she said, it's too much. I'm not going to quietly walk away. I'm not. I'm ashamed of what I may have been doing. I'm ashamed of what my colleagues are doing. But unlike them, I'm actually going to say something. And, it's infectious. That's why people like that get into a lot of trouble, because the fear at the top is not about this or that one, but about the whole phenomena. Because people watching her give testimony are going to wonder about doing it themselves. They're going to look at their partner sitting next to them on the sofa and say, I could tell quite a story about where I'm working or what I'm doing,
yes,
or what I'm asked to do. And you begin, that's why you have to go after the WikiLeaks. That's why
it is.
you have to go out against Assange and all of them, because of the infectiousness of a system that is as wobbly and as frightened and as unclear about what to do about its problems, which is why it doesn't solve them. So it's busy doing what people do when they can't solve their problems. They hide them, and they start by hiding them from themselves.
It's really interesting that both the Pandora Papers and the Facebook leaker and the Steve Dozinger trial. Steve Dozinger, of course, is the lawyer who revealed that Chevron was poisoning people in the rainforest, I think it was Ecuadorian rainforest, and didn't give a hat about who they killed or whatever. And all of these stories are kind of convalescing at the same time. I've been reporting on activism for some time, and it's unusual when two enormous whistleblower stories break at the same time. Your thoughts?
I'm seeing it everywhere. And for me, it's now accumulated too for me. I'm beginning to speak and write in a way I haven't before about the end of an empire, that the United States has had a couple of centuries riding up the hill. And that was a good ride up that hill of great prosperity and great high standard of living and all of that. But the peak is behind us. We're on the way down, and the ride down is way less fun than the ride up, to say the least.
No kidding.
One of the things that happens when an empire goes down, very sad but very important, is that the people at the top, feeling it going down, become desperate to hold on to what they have. And because they're at the top, they have more ways to do that than those of us in the middle or at the bottom. We don't have all of the mechanisms. So one of the things they need to do is hide their wealth, lest the decline threaten them at some point. So they become more interested. I think historians will say to us, you know why South Dakota and Nevada did that in the last 10 or 15 years? Because the demand for that service, hiding your wealth, has been growing. But here's another sign. The Hollywood one of the Hollywood unions.
Yeah, the union.
They just voted the other day 98%. I mean, you don't see that in most unions, except in special times, that 98% of the people in the union voted to authorize a strike against the Hollywood studios because of their anger, that in the effort to recoup the profits that were lost in 2020 and 2021, employers across this country are trying to squeeze more profits out of their workers, raising prices. That's the inflation that we see, because they want to make up for lost time. In other words, they want to push the burden of the economic system that doesn't work real well onto everybody below them, hiding their money, squeezing their workers. But what you're seeing that's really interesting is pushing back. Movements to not pay higher prices for food, movements to strike an employer who does this. Here's a little statistic that people like me who are economists have to watch. The government keeps track of people who quit their job. They didn't get laid off. They decided, I've had it, I'm out of here.
Like the Walmart people.
Yeah, it's at
We're going online, quitting their jobs. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But
no, you're right. We've never seen these enormous numbers of people. And I think it's people who were forced to kind of think a little bit about life because they couldn't go to work. They were stuck at home. They had to, deal with their children and all the other details of life because they couldn't go to work. And now going back into work, they're asking questions and seeing it with new eyes. And they're saying, this is outrageous what I am asked to do here for this amount of money under these circumstances. And the next time the employer says, well, we're going to only be able to give you 40 minutes for lunch, not an hour, suddenly that thing, which by itself wouldn't have done it, it's that, it's the straw that broke the camel's back. It's the last thing. And it's like those people who are so upset about America that they don't want to get a vaccine. This is when your life has become so bad, you're self-destructive. You don't even need the system anymore. You do it to yourself. This kind of a situation, these are all signs of an empire declining. You see that in the British Empire, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, on. And we are now entering that phase. And I have to say to you, this is not going to be pretty.
I guess we're going to have to leave it there, but that is a good place to leave it. I hate to depress everyone, but I think, it is interesting to be reporting on activism and mobilization during these times when as you say, the empire is in decline. Professor Wolff, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I'm always, it thrills me when something that is so pertinent to your expertise happens 2 days before you're coming on. So I'm really grateful that you could be here. We'll see you in another month. I encourage everyone to go to YouTube or your local radio station and listen to Professor Wolff's economic update. Plus on YouTube, there's a whole bunch of other little pieces like that Libertarian one. I suggest everyone go, that just came out, I think yesterday or 2 days ago. And it's up there. Democracy at Work is the name of the YouTube channel. Thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Juliana, and thank you for having me.
You are watching ACT TV's Act Now. Thank you so much for watching our program. We will be back next. Wait, no, it's only Wednesday. It feels already like Friday. We'll be back on Friday. Josh Holland is going to be joining us to take a rundown of the week's headlines. That's always fun. Josh Holland of Alternet and The Nation and a whole bunch of other places, including his podcast, We've Got Issues, which is amazing. Keep an ear out for that. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to tell your friends about us and share us across social networks, except for Facebook, because right now I'm very mad about Facebook and I just can't. I'm Juliana Forlano. You can follow me on Twitter, the Methadone Clinic of social media. I will see you on Friday. Thanks for watching.